Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you all on, see, what is today? Thursday, February 16th, 2023. I'm Tiffany Edwards, the current chair of the EETAC, and let's get kicked off. Zoom meeting protocol. I think we kind of know, we've been doing this a while now. I think we kind of know the ground rules, so I will spare you all from my spiel. And I think I can see everybody, so if I can't, when we're doing, if there's any votes or straw polls or anything like that, I'll let you know, but I think I can see everyone at this point. So I think first item on the agenda is the agenda review. Are there any changes or suggestions on that? Does that look okay to everybody? Good. Okay. We don't normally do a vote on the agenda, right? Okay. All right. I'm going to move into the approval of the Zoom meeting summary. I'm going to make a mention of something I noticed because I did watch. I went back and watched, and I noticed that you have on the record of action taking under the straw poll proposed for the approval of the December 1st meeting, you actually had, wait, no, it's bylaws. You had Ed McMahon listed as present and voting yes. And I know Ed was not there last meeting. So I just want to make
sure that. I will correct that.
And otherwise, it all looks good to me. So if anybody had anything to bring up or corrections, please let me know. Otherwise, I would take a motion.
Okay. Where am I? There we go.
This is
I
how
move to approve the minutes.
Okay, thank you, John.
Hearing.
A second.
And Mark, seconded by Mark. Okay, I will call for the vote. All those in favor of minutes from, what day was that? That was like exactly a month ago.
January 19th.
January 19th. There it is. Okay. Approval of January 19th. All those in favor. Phil has his hand up. Phil, are you voting?
I'm voting
Okay.
yes, and sorry, my video's not working, so
Okay.
yeah.
All those in favor, go ahead and raise your hands. And while I wasn't there, I'm raising my hand because I did go through and.
Not sure what we're raising our hands for.
Hi, Rick.
We just elected you chair.
Congratulations, you're the new chair. We're kidding. We are voting on the approval of the January 19th meeting minutes.
I wonder if he can't hear us. I think he struggled to get
Okay.
his
That's probably
sound working last time, I think. So I will I can mark him.
I can't get volume. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Sorry, yes.
I hear nobody.
It's the speaker. Okay.
Well, while we're waiting for Rick to connect, I can say something nice. I ran into Ed and he looked great. Just want to say.
Aw.
He looked really great. He was smiling and fabulous. That's my report.
Okay.
I can just mark Rick as absent for the vote since he isn't fully present right now.
All right, I'm trying something really quick here. I don't know if anyone else is. This must be a setting. I have the chat open and it is enormous, and so I didn't know if that was just me, but I got it all on a different screen, so I'm just gonna leave it there. Okay, we do have a public comment period for the meeting. So Elena, is there anybody who has?
Now
Elena, you're on mute, sorry.
We do have a member of the public in attendance.
We do.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
So-
let's see here. We have an attendee. So I'm gonna ask Mr. Murray, if you are interested in speaking and public speaking to the providing some public comment, if you could either raise your hand or just Elena, I don't know, do you have to move him as a panelist?
Yep, it looks like they've raised their
He is
hand, so
raising
I
his hand.
will
Okay, so
allow
go ahead.
them to
Perfect.
talk.
Hi, can you hear me? This is John Q. I just want to say I've been covering public meetings. We're kind of filling gaps in our news coverage. So we cover boards and commissions, neighborhoods and nonprofits, and I'm just here reporting on today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
And what
Perfect.
publication were you with, or what organization?
Okay.
Whole Community News, we're a partner with KEPW 97.3 FM, Eugene Peaceworks Radio.
Great.
Perfect. Thank you so much and welcome. All right. Well, without further ado, I think we're ready, Heather, to move into the first item on the agenda. And I noticed you had a couple different documents, and maybe if you, I'm kind of following along with mine. If you could tell us which one, because there were two related to the job population and jobs, and I don't know if one was just more updated. Maybe you'll
Yeah.
tell us. Okay.
Yep, and I'll just apologize. I've got a voice issue happening, so definitely let me know if you can't understand what I'm saying, or if you need clarification. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen to make sure we're all looking at the same one. I did send out an email that the one we want to look at for jobs and population is version 2. It says it's updated. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oops, sorry, hold please. There we go. Okay, as is typical, when I'm sharing my screen, I should be able to see you all, but if I miss you, I guess Tiffany, you'll catch them. Let me just make everybody bigger here. All right. So just as a reminder how we're doing this format, we talked a little bit last time about what the annual report was going to look like, and the where we landed was that while we're going to be bringing a lot of key data to the EETAC to review, not all of that data is going to end up in the annual report. I think Sue talked about it as a report card level of data, and if people want more information outside of this meeting, we can get that to them once we do the annual report. But I just wanted to kind of remind you that you're seeing more here in text and really snippets out of the appendix that we've updated for the purposes of your review. But these are not the documents that are going to be in the annual report. The annual report is going to be a lot more pithy, especially for this initial year, because we just did the comprehensive report. So with that opening, the other thing that we did a little bit different from the last set of data that we brought, Elena's idea, which I really liked, was adding in the beginning of the data document the key snapshot table for the data that we're reviewing in this document. So this document is mostly focused on growth, population growth, and employment growth. Those are two of our key population and jobs data that we're keeping an eye on. And so just as a reminder of how this table works, we have the items that are, or the metrics that are adopted as part of the UGB analysis have a little asterisk. So for the 20 years, we have an adopted forecast of growing at a 0.9% growth rate. The ones that don't have an asterisk are items we're keeping an eye on, or they were baseline data at the time that we started the UGB analysis. One thing that I thought was a little bit confusing, and that's part of the reason you're seeing the change here, is that we have an employment growth rate forecast as well. That's 1.4% that we adopted. That's why it has the asterisk. And then we had it repeated here because Lane County regularly, they are going to get a growth rate forecast every year now. That's new, but it started last year and we just got the new one. That's why we updated these materials. We just got the new one last Thursday. But when I had them both listed here, I thought it was a little bit confusing because it's like employment growth rate and then employment growth rate forecast. But actually, this is the growth rate forecast that we were assuming in the UGB analysis. And really what this one was about is tracking Lane County's growth rate forecast. Since that's going to be updated regularly, we're actually not going to get a new forecast for Eugene until we do our new UGB analysis. And so that's why I made that clarification here. And so what you're seeing is, again, we have an adopted growth forecast of 1.4% for Eugene. The latest and greatest data is for Eugene is 2020 data, and it's showing that we have been growing at 1.8%. We'll talk more about that. And then the Lane County data, we just got the 2021 forecast data, and so I've updated that here. So we'll get into that more, but that's essentially why it's a little bit different than the first version we gave you. So, and then just as a reminder, the overview, this format is taken from the appendix or appendices. The overviews have not changed. It's really the takeaways that have changed with updated data and the updated data charts. So for population growth, and I have the ability to show you the chart that was in the comprehensive report too, so we can flip back and forth as needed. But basically with population growth, what we're doing is we're just adding another year here. So in the comprehensive report, we had 2012 through 2021. The growth rate was 1.2%. We have another year of data for Eugene. So 2012 to 2022, it's still the same. It's 1.2% growth rate is what we've seen, even adding in a new year. And just as a reminder, so that's from the table up above as a comparison for 20 years, we are 2012 through 2032, our adopted forecast is to grow at 0.9%. So we're still growing faster than projected for the 20-year period. But just as a reminder, we're a little bit over halfway through that 20-year period. So it may even out. We have not received a new population forecast from PSU. So different than job growth forecasts. For population, we actually are getting a new forecast from PSU every 4 years. We have not received a new one since the comprehensive report. The last one we got was the 2021 forecast. So that's still here. And that shows us growing basically at the same rate that our adopted forecast is. So this is not new. This is the same data that was in the comprehensive report. The reason I'm bringing it up, one, is to say this data hasn't changed. We don't have a new forecast. But the other thing is I noticed that this last bar here says current 21 to 50 year forecast, 2041 to 2070. It should actually be current 31 to 50 year forecast, 2041 to 2070. So what we did is we broke out the new forecast it's really long. It's a 50-year forecast. And so we broke it out so that you can get a comparison of the next 20 years and then 30 to 50 years or 31 to 50 years, rather than just showing you a whole 50-year forecast. Because really what we want to do is kind of compare these two rates right here, our adopted 20-year compared to the latest and greatest 20-year. So again, this data hasn't changed, but I wanted to bring it up because I realized that we had a typo here. Any questions about population growth? Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
So is the gray bars on the right, is that Lane County?
It is Lane County. Where is my label? Good point. Thank you.
That's
I
what
guess I clipped it out.
Okay,
Yeah. Thank you. Rick.
Go ahead, Rick.
Okay.
Rick, you're muted.
Okay, so maybe just a suggestion on the bars, because when you look across these from a visual standpoint, the bar on the farthest left is 1.5 and the bar on the left side of Lane County is 1, and yet they kind of show like they're the same if you just look at it visually. I might suggest you think about putting those in perspective. So if I look at 1.5 on one side, I realize very quickly that Lane County is significantly less at 1.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's difficult to
Right.
do with the way that Tableau is set up. But I guess what we could do is, it's funny because they actually are exactly the same size. So maybe we should do something to mess with the scale of the chart. That might help.
Yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, and I don't know necessarily if we are going to show these in the annual report. Last time we kind of talked about not having a whole bunch of charts and stuff in the annual report. So maybe what we do is just show this one, the Eugene one, or we can figure out how to make this look a little bit smaller. But yeah, even the 0.8% looks like it's almost the same as the 1.2, and that's not right. So I totally see what you're saying. Somehow the perspective's off.
Well, I mean, they're separate graphs, and so I could see that they're just scaling to themselves and not to another. So I don't know how you resolve that other than to put all those numbers and graph them in one and then separate it out just to see where they all. But I do see what Rick is saying. Howard had his hand up, but then you put it down. So I don't know if you're welcome to chime in.
You may have already answered this, but I was just kind of curious. The last 3 years were, different than any other period just because of COVID. And I'm just curious how, if you've looked at how growth rates, employment, as well as population, how that might have skewed. If you had taken out the last 3 years, would we really see much difference? Especially like on employment, where it skyrocketed and then it's fallen back down close to pre-COVID levals, and so I just if you look at the data, it's just that's quite a bit different, obviously, than what have been the normal trends.
Yeah, we did not, because we're measuring over the monitoring period in these charts, we didn't figure out what the growth rate was for like 2012 through maybe 2019. But we could do that in potentially the next comprehensive report, where we might want to look a little bit further at that. And also, our next forecast is going to come from PSU in 2025, which sounds like far away, but it's really not. And they, they're kind of the population experts. And so that's some of the stuff that they'll do, is they'll dig into what the impacts were and whether or not they think that they're going to continue, or if we're still in recovery. So it's definitely something that we can, I'll see if we can do it. And then also it might be better to get that information from PSU's Population Research Center when they give us a whole report on Lane County. Yeah, but we'll definitely look for that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in the long term, it probably makes no difference. Although, work patterns, as we all know, maybe have changed. With remote work, maybe that is going away. I don't know. It seems to be pretty fluid, and how that might affect future population growth as well as employment rates.
I'm making a note. Thank you. I don't know if this is helpful. This chart has the actual growth rate back to 1990. It has our adopted 0.9%, which is out to the UGB, whereas this is just city limits. And then it also has our growth rate based on that actual trend. So what's it, just thinking about what you're saying, I'm wondering if we have some of the information here. I mean, maybe it's not fine-grained enough, but you can see the individual rates, and over the long term, like you said, it doesn't seem to have a huge impact. I mean, we're still growing. I think that's one thing that I would say. But yeah, anyway. And so, I mean, I don't know, just moving on to this chart, do you have any questions about this? Does this help at all with what you're looking for, kind of seeing these different ways? It also has the 50-year forecast in here too, which is a little bit higher than our adopted forecast, but then it levels back out. One of the things that we noticed in looking at population forecasts, and they're doing them much differently now, but decades ago, they always seemed like they were pretty optimistic, much more optimistic than what actually ended up coming to fruition, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, I just saw a hand, and then they disappeared. Mark, go for it.
Well, one quick question for Heather is what does optimistic mean?
Oh, when we looked at past, not these ones from PSU that we're getting now, but when we looked at population forecasts, they were like 2 and 3% back in the 90s, and even after that, and then when we looked at what actually happened, I mean, you can see, we just didn't, I mean, it's definitely growth, but it wasn't quite at that level. So it was, we just did some checking to see how accurate have some of these forecasts been. And like I said, mostly it seems like they have been more optimistic than what actually happened.
Okay, so I guess in that context, the word optimistic implies that it's favorable to have a high growth rate. Others might just call that, whatever the rate was. That is not putting a value judgment on it, but I wondered, what you meant in that respect. So, thank you.
Got it. Yeah, so I can talk about that a little bit more. A lot of times, especially back then, growth was seen as a optimistic thing for cities because it would increase your tax base. It would, grow your city, grow your resources, all of those things. So yeah, it definitely was posed in an optimistic light. I can't say that that's exactly why I use that terminology, but now that you're making me think about it, I do feel like now the population forecasts are maybe a little bit more factual and less about feeling like they were more of a optimistic or a negative. I mean, on the other hand, I will say that if you get the Oregon, it's the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis, Phil has brought up these emails that they send out, these newsletters, and they definitely talk about the impact on the economy if your state is usually what they are talking about. But if you have a negative growth rate, what happens to the economy? And nobody wants our economy to tank. So in that sense, I think, there is some value to talking about it that way, but yeah.
Okay, I guess my reaction has to do with just the earth as a whole can't afford to keep growing. And so somewhere or other, we're going to have to we collectively on the planet are going to have to figure out how to live with zero growth rate, say. So, I mean, I can understand why every locality wants a high growth rate because for the reasons you outlined, but in the long run, that's not going to work. So that's of course not really relevant to our immediate effort.
Correct. Yeah. But how we will grow will be part of the UGB analysis. Yeah. This is just monitoring.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna move on. So apologies for the track changes, but I really just wanted to show you where we updated the information for the new jobs forecast. So let's see, scoot down here so we can look at, this actually has the old and the new chart in it, but so the new chart shows that, again, similar to population, that we have been growing. Eugene has been growing over the monitoring period, basically 1.8%. And for Eugene, the jobs data we have is through 2020. In the comprehensive report, it was through 2018. So just as a reminder of why that is, we get county jobs data every year, but it takes quite a bit of work to reallocate that jobs data to be according to cities and not just at the county level. And we actually pay Lane Council of Governments to do that for us. And so we have made the fiscal decision to not have that done every year. So that does mean that sometimes our data is a little, a couple years is going to be a couple years behind at this point. So anyway, we have still seen job growth through 2020. It was 1.8, basically 1.8%, and that is still higher than the adopted forecast at 1.4%. Just as a presentation bar. Just as a reminder of what the growth rate looked like from 2012 to 2018, it was way higher. And so this is a little bit, I think, of what you were getting at, Howard, is that pre-pandemic, because our jobs data was older for Eugene, we could see that our growth rate was pretty high. It was almost double what we were forecasting for the 20-year period. But now when we've added in, excuse me about that, when we've added in a couple more years, we've started to see it slow down a little bit. And that is consistent with the forecast, at least for Lane County. So with the last forecast for Lane County for 2020 to 2030, it was a 1.4% rate. So a little bit slower than the Lane County forecast we adopted for Eugene, which was 1.43. And the new forecast is even slower. So for 2021 to 2031, it's at 1.2. Or yeah, 1.2. And so just seeing that slow down, but then also hearing from the Office of Economic Analysis that in the comprehensive report, they had let us know that Lane County was adding back a lot of jobs that had been lost in the pandemic. So we just wanted to dig into that a little bit further. And even though employment by category, these kind of generalized categories is not something we planned on reporting in the annual report, it's not in our key data table. We thought it was helpful to provide context to the growth that we're seeing. And the slowdown, and what did that mean for our overall jobs? And so what's interesting is that for Lane County, even though the growth rate has slowed down, total jobs in 2021 was 150,000, which is basically, right in here. It's not quite at what it was in 2018, but it's pretty close. It's basically at 2016 levels. And similarly with Eugene, to our 2020 jobs, again, the growth rate has slowed down. We're not at 2018, but we're closer to our 2016 levels. So jobs are starting to go back up in the county. Since the 2020 data, they've started to go back up. So we're probably going to see that in Eugene when we get our 2022 data. So again, this is kind of a lot of information, but it was just to put some context around the growth rate that seemed like it was continuing to go down. And what does that mean? The other thing I would note here is that particularly in looking at the county, our proportions are still pretty similar. You're not seeing a huge change between you're just not seeing a huge change between the proportions between the different job sectors, which was kind of interesting. So holding a little steady. Rick?
Go ahead, Rick.
So I'm not sure exactly how to ask this, but we see more companies advertising for employees of all sectors, more than I can ever remember in the almost 50 years I've lived here. So is there a way to, I'm not sure I want to see a way, but is there a way to understand in these information that job growth might be substantially higher if we had people actually out there looking for the jobs that are being offered? Because it seems like there's a lot of jobs being offered that aren't being filled. Am I making any sense here?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we can do that in this data. And just, with the annual report, we're trying to limit the amount of additional analysis we're doing. It's that report card concept of just like checking in. So I'm not sure with our existing charts if we can say, we do have the unemployment rate, which continues to go down. That's later down here.
Right, and all of that is historically low for Eugene and Lane County.
Yeah.
And so my concern gets to be is, as we're trying to monitor growth, are we underestimating the number of employees we actually need to fill the employment demand that's out there? Anyways, I'll let somebody else stick it in because I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to ask, other than it just seems to me we're in a completely different time than we've ever experienced in Eugene, in Lane County.
I'm gonna let John go, but then I actually want to take a crack at what Rick is getting at. Go ahead, John.
Well, if you want to go, you can go, Tiffany. I'll go after you.
Well, I was just what we in my profession have seen is a tremendous amount of retirements, and so that was the piece that I wasn't sure if there's any way that we're able to capture, because it's the openings that, you know, and I'm of course I'm the public sector and I'm one company, but a lot of the openings that we're seeing that we're having to recruit from outside the area, whatnot, is just a massive amount of retirement that has happened since 2020. That's off the charts. And so, you know, I know it's different for public sector versus maybe a private sector. But I don't know if that's captured anywhere that would show that actually the jobs, you know, that the vacancy, because they won't be reflected in an unemployment, because these are not people who are unemployed. They have left the job market permanently, and they're not asking for unemployment, so they're not gonna register anywhere. But then those job openings are gonna show up, and so it was kind of one of those little freakonomic things that I thought maybe is factoring in. And so maybe it's not necessarily reflecting that people aren't applying for the jobs that are out there. It's the fact that they've said, I'm done working, I'm retiring, I'm going home. I don't know. So anyway, John, go ahead. John, can you hear me? John Borofsky, are you frozen? Oh, there you are.
There you go.
I'm back. Thanks. So one of my questions has to do with the use of this data and kind of our changing workforce. So we're clawing these numbers from people who are covered by workers' comp, and we're going to use these numbers to decide whether we need more land for employment going forward. Well, if I've got a worker, not so much in my industry, but I know a lot of industries that have workers that are paid by companies in the city of Eugene who are working remotely and do not live in the city of Eugene, who are covered by unemployment insurance. So we're going to be basing land needs on jobs that may not be here. You know what I'm saying? So, and I don't know if there's a way to capture that, but if we're expanding for jobs, if the numbers tell us that we need 300 acres for jobs because we don't have enough buildable land for the employees that we have here, but 2% of those jobs are people that live in London and draw a paycheck from a Eugene company. And I don't know if there's a way to capture that, but I think this may be, Rick will like this may be our phantom land of the next generation. It's phantom jobs, that need acres for the jobs, because we're calculating acres of employment land by the number of jobs that are there. Just a notation.
Yeah, I think, no, it's a great reminder. If I remember correctly, if I went back to the comprehensive report, I think that we put a recommendation in about the next time we do the UGB analysis that we needed to figure out if there were additional sources to help us deal with remote work and what changes in not just remote work, but like potentially changes in online retail compared to needing a brick and mortar, what those things do to our land need. And so we may not have the data in growth monitoring right now that helps us with that. But with the UGB and not, growth monitoring, we're not just going to take the numbers in growth monitoring and plug them into the UGB analysis. UGB analysis is going to need a lot more context around housing needs, housing markets, employment needs, employment trends that are not captured in just kind of doing these report cards. I mean, growth monitoring is going to help inform that work for sure. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We're going to need more updated context because we can't just plug in these numbers. That's not going to work. Yeah.
You're right, Heather, that one of the recommendations is explore whether employment is still growing and if the need for employment land is also growing, or if less land is needed based on market changes.
Great. Okay, good. Yeah, so we'll have to revisit those recommendations when we start our UGB analysis.
Okay, I have Phil and then Sue.
I just forwarded an email to Heather and Elena, which maybe you guys can forward this on to the whole ETAC. Just came to my phone from the Oregon Employment Department, or my email. I'm looking on my phone here while we're on the computer. So it says Lane County jobs projected to increase by 12% by 2031. And like Tiffany was saying too, they attribute some of the job openings will be created in 2031 due to the need to replace workers who retire. So, and John's not wrong either, that there are changes in work conditions and more employers are willing to put the place of employment on the backs of their workers rather than providing it for them. So that may materially change some of the land calculation analyses that would go into the next UGB update. All that said, there are certain industries that are land intensive, or we're hearing about need for chip production and manufacturing and just not enough land and not enough sites in Oregon, certainly not here as well. And our former chip manufacturing plant is now a sign company. So, and probably I would imagine there's a lot of excess capacity in that building beyond what's needed for the production of whatever they're doing in it. So all this I think is, good information to have, lots more data to come. So if you all want to pass along that stuff to the rest of the committee, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. Sue, you're up.
Well, that was the perfect segue, Philip, because I just read an article in the Portland Business Journal today about the conflict between the urban reserves and rural reserve land in Washington County, where it has been designated as rural urban reserves. And because of the CHIPS Act, there are people now wanting to convert that into 500-acre parcels for development. So I think we just don't know. I mean, we can't know. We can't anticipate all the things that can happen. And I think our best task is to track this data as best we can and give some time, because frankly, this has been, only a year, basically. So we have so much more data that we need to collect in order to make draw any kind of conclusions. And once we draw those conclusions, they might be right, they might be wrong, we don't know.
Thank you, Sue. All right. Anyone else?
So I touched a little bit on unemployment. Again, continues to go down. I did put the 5.8% of what it was in 2020 because that's the most recent Eugene jobs data we have. But in parentheses, I put what it is now as of 2022, and that was 3.3%. So continuing to go down. Average annual wage or pay. So this was an interesting one. Just gonna drop down here while I talk about it. It always gets a little bit tricky when you are or aren't adjusting for inflation with your numbers. And so one of the things that I've had a hard time with the annual report talking about is we want to compare what's happened in the monitoring period, whether it's over the whole monitoring period or today, 2022 data to the beginning of the monitoring period. But I also wanted to tell you how we reported it in the comprehensive report. Because, so what is it now? And then how is that different from last year? And so when you're adjusting for inflation, I find that gets a little bit tricky. So while I have bolded the Lane County information in this takeaway, because I think it's the most recent, most relevant, or it's the most recent. This information actually was in the comprehensive report. So for Lane County, it wasn't new data. The new data was for Eugene, which is here. Because again, instead of having 2018 jobs data, we have 2020 jobs data. And so when you're looking at comparing 2016, just because that was the last jobs wage data we had for Eugene, and that's what we did in the comprehensive report, 2016 and to 2020, we saw that job wages rose 16%. And I've given the numbers here, not adjusted for inflation. But in the comprehensive report, if I go back to here, hold on while I'm scrolling, I apologize. We had, where'd it go? Here we go. We had Eugene data. Annual pay for Eugene jobs rose 6% between 2016 and 2018, not adjusted for inflation. So I struggled a little bit with how to talk about it because it's not adjusted for inflation, but it seemed a little bit confusing to say, to give the numbers for the multiple different years. And so what I did instead was I just said that the rate or the annual pay rose 16% between 2016 and 2020, compared to between 2016 and 2018, it was 6%. So it's quite a big difference, but I just tried to stay away from the individual numbers because I thought it could get confusing. It's even hard for me to explain. I'm not very good at explaining this part of it. But I just wondered, like, again, this data isn't necessarily going anywhere, but it's good to know that job wages have gone up quite a bit compared, when we add additional years. But it's also like a pretty different period. 2016 to 2018 is really only 3 years. 2016 to 2020, and then it includes 2020. So there's just a lot there. And I don't know if there's anything else that would be more helpful or if that's too much information. I think at this point for the annual report, I would just say this part that Eugene jobs wage data indicates that wages have gone up 16% between 2016 and 2020 and not worry about how we reported it in the last comprehensive report. And then I think the Lane County wage data, because it includes 2021, is important, but it has been adjusted. So it's like a little bit of apples and oranges. So anyway, there's my dirty laundry. You have it. I usually like to come to you with a little bit more solid of a recommendation, but when I was going back and revising this section, I was like, ew, I don't know, this doesn't feel right to me. So if you have any recommendations, that would be great.
Phil and then John.
Yeah, I really wasn't paying so much attention to the dirty laundry. Thanks for explaining that to us. I guess the thing that I found, I think most relevant to me, or what I was maybe looking for, and kind of the graph below, if you could scroll up just a wee bit. Yeah, it's just sort of, Oregon and Lane County, we've always lagged behind the national trends for wages. And at least that trend, at least at the, I guess it's really the state level, has narrowed somewhat. And I don't know about, Lane County to US, but and maybe we aren't even kind of arcing as high as the state was. But I mean, that was sort of what I was tracking, was just like, are we getting any better of catching up to basically lagging behind the country? So, and I don't know if that's worth commenting on in the report or anything, but I think you did a great job. Thanks.
Great.
John, go ahead.
So Heather, could we put the inflation adjustment into those dollars? I mean, it should be just a simple formula. You multiply 41,000 by whatever. I mean, obviously there's a formula that does that. And then,
Yeah.
and then you can see what the true apples to apples are.
Yeah.
I mean, it may be more complicated than that, but it seems like there should be just
A way to just adjust for inflation and just and change the numbers and then just say adjusted for inflation. So it is more of an apples to apples. Is that what you're saying, John?
That's what I was thinking. I mean, we've got a 41,411 that was in 18 or 16, and then multiply it by whatever the inflation rate was over those 5 years, and we know what it is now. 49,000 is today's dollar.
This is 2020 dollars.
Okay, yeah. So that Eugene's is in 2020 dollars, or is it in?
Yeah. I mean, this is 2020 data. So it would be the 49 would be
49 is correct. That's today's dollar. It's the
2020.
41. It's the 41 that's not, right?
Yeah.
So you gotta take 41
And make it in 2020 dollars.
right, and then you would have your true percentage.
But it still wouldn't be the same as the Lane County data, which is in 2021 dollars. And I don't know, maybe
Right.
maybe that's okay. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, if we're doing adjusted for inflation above, do adjusted for inflation below, and just, that's 2020. That's a 2020 dollar. I don't know. Just a thought.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying, John. Mark and then Phil, if you are wanting back in the queue, that's cool, but okay, maybe not. So go ahead, Mark.
Yes, following on Phil's point about the comparison of Eugene and Lane County and Oregon to the national average, and saying that we are consistently low, I don't know for sure, but I've always assumed that, or not, I mean, I assume now that difference reflects cost of living differences in Oregon relative to the national average. And thus, if we are making some kind of point about this, a significance to the difference between Oregon and the national average, then it seems to me that it's incomplete if we don't also take into account the cost of living difference. That's all.
Yeah, I can look to at the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis. I don't know why that's such a hard phrase for me to say, but they do such a good job with their jobs data, wage data, housing, all of this stuff. And they have their information on their blog categorized by topics. And so I can look and see if there's any information in there.
All right, Phil and then Rick.
Just a question for staff. Do you guys have Erin Fifield reviewing this? And, you know, she's
Ann?
Ann, I'm sorry, not Erin. Ann Fifield, since she's a great content expert, kind of internal to the city. So
Yep.
She might
Yeah,
have some
she
help, huh?
reviewed the comprehensive report. We haven't had her review the annual report. You know, really what we did with this annual data is we just went in and, you know, surgically changed language and text. And so that was, yeah, part of the reason that, you know, as I was reading it, I mean, I did it, it's all factually correct. It's just, I wondered from your all's perspective if that was confusing. So yeah, she is a great resource.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a little confused, Heather, on your first line where you say Lane County went from 43,309, 2012 to 52,596, adjusted to 2021 dollars. It's not really adjusted to 2021 dollars. It is 2021 dollars, correct?
Oh, that was for 2012 was adjusted to $2021.
But so if it was unadjusted, that number for 2012 would be significantly less.
I think it would be different. Yeah.
See, I'm not sure that that's actually true. I just checked really quickly, and the 43,000 ends up being kind of the 2012 income level. It's not adjusted anywhere. At least that's the way I read it. And the other question or the other comment I have is, I don't think people care if something's adjusted for inflation or not. It's all about the nominal dollars that they live with today. And I think
Right.
that's what we're trying to reflect here is today the average person's making in Eugene 49,472.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect that to be adjusted for inflation.
No, it's not. It's more the backwards in time.
Right. Well, but I don't think it is backwards in time. I'm not sure where these numbers are coming from, but
They're coming from the Oregon Employment Department's QCEW data.
but are they saying it's not adjusted for inflation in their documents?
That data is,
This is
yes.
coming from OEA.
OED, Oregon Employment Department.
Okay. Huh.
Yeah.
I guess I would
okay.
question if they have it correct.
Oh, no, I'm sure maybe the word, I've got some bad wording in here. So this is exactly what we want to make sure that we have, right? So we'll go back, or I'll go back and double check that I've got where it's adjusted correctly or not. And I actually think that this group made that comment when we reviewed the comprehensive report, that similar to what you're saying, Rick, about whether or not people care if it's adjusted or not, that it could be more of a footnote instead of actually putting it in the text, because it gets confusing. And like you said, people don't really care necessarily.
People simply care that I've got $50,000 to live with on average today.
Right. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll circle back with you all. And it sounds like, I think that we will revise this takeaway. And what I'll do is I can email it out to everyone how we revise it. Does that work? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Heather. And you did just have this conversation because I rather recently listened to the last meeting, and that you all were talking about this. And I think the footnote was where you landed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
During the census data last meeting.
Yeah.
Great.
It's fresher for me, so that's why I remember.
Well, that's good. At least we're being consistent. I just didn't transfer that idea over, but that's a good idea. I just want to make sure we track it so I know, in case somebody asks that question. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And I've got a note to follow up with revised language for this section so that you guys are aware how it ended up.
All right, then we can move on to housing development. So this is just sort of part one, about some key housing numbers and housing mix data, and I will share my screen. And hopefully not lose internet. I already gotten kicked off once in this meeting, so we shall see.
And I think what we just went through, Jennifer, is kind of what you were talking about at City Council. When somebody asks, are these adjusted for inflation? You're going to say, yes, we had a 45-minute discussion on it twice.
Twice.
All right, so this is the clip from the key assumptions table that shows the updated housing structure types that make up our housing mix. And so those are updated after the Middle Housing Code amendments got adopted. And so we now have single unit detached housing, middle housing, and multiple unit housing. And it basically shows, all of the charts will show that single unit detached and middle housing have been developed below pace or below what adopted forecasts, and that multiple unit housing has been developed above pace. The number of new dwellings, just the straight total, is on pace to meet the adopted forecast need. However, we'll touch on later, that's mostly being met by multiple unit housing. So the dwellings per year. John, do you want to ask a question?
Just one quick question.
Yep.
So middle housing would have been grouped into which category before? Would it have been into multi-unit?
So we had single unit detached and single unit attached. And so townhouses and row houses would have been a part of single unit attached. And then duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes would have been a part of multiple unit.
So of that 2%, we could maybe say 1% went to the line above it and 1% went to the line below it, maybe.
So
See what I'm saying? So if there's 2% middle housing, and before we've got 25% of single detached, maybe that should be in the old numbers, that would be 26 of single detached, and on the other one maybe 74 of multi. I'm just trying to figure out where they fit in, so where we're below and above.
I'm not exactly sure if this is going to answer what you're getting at, but we recategorized all of the housing back to 2012.
Okay.
So the 2012 through 2022 data got recategorized into these three housing structure types. So we're not capturing single unit attached as part of single unit detached now, or old duplexes as part of multiple unit. They're getting categorized into middle housing.
Right. And it's not, for me, it's not that big of a deal because it's at 2%. And if let's say we were at 20% of middle housing, it would be interesting to know of that, how it would have been categorized before, right? If that 20%, 2% of it was duplexes and 18% of it was actually multi-unit, that would, you know what I'm saying? But it's no big deal.
What would that tell us?
Well, if we were on target for multifamily or multi-unit as opposed to on target to single unit.
Mm.
Because that's what the targets were before, but it's fine. I just wanted to know how they were categorized, and I can extrapolate that myself.
I would just jump in really quick. John, if you want to go back to, I was just pulling up the document, to ETAC's meeting in December. We went through, there's a document in that folder that says housing mix charts reformatted for middle housing. And so it shows the old housing mix and then broken down by housing type subcategories, so 2 to 4 units. And then it shows the new housing mix and then the new subcategories. So you can, so we reviewed those with you. It had no new data in it. It was just showing, it's a crosswalk showing those changes. So you can look at it there.
All right, so the first chart is dwellings per year and dwellings on average per year. Oop, I don't know how that happened, but it shows that so our forecast average was 755 dwellings per year. And we currently, or over the monitoring period, it was at 949 dwellings per year. And a total of 9,997 net new dwellings between 2012 through 2022. Pretty straightforward chart. And then we also have a chart for the dwellings by housing mix. So again, that's single unit detached, middle housing, and multiple unit. Go into more detail here about how those are defined and what structure types those include. So for example, middle housing includes both duplexes that may be 2 unattached units or 2 detached units, 2 attached units or 2 detached units, and sort of all of those makeups of triplexes and fourplexes and whatnot. And so, like I noted, single unit housing has been produced or developed slower than we've been expecting, as well as middle housing and that higher rate of multiple unit dwellings. So about 25% of new dwellings were single unit detached, 73% multi-unit, and only 2% middle housing. And that is illustrated in this chart. So you can see the historical data from 2001 through 2012, the 2012-2022 monitoring period. And then if that were to continue, what the trend would look like versus our adopted forecast. Sue.
So if you go back, can you just scroll back a little bit there? The should the development trend from 2012 to 2022 continue? That whole paragraph sort of disturbed me as I read it. I thought it's adding an element of complexity that I'm not sure we need. I guess my own personal position is that we should be collecting the data and laying it out rather neutrally so that conclusions can be drawn. But this seems like it's sort of putting potential conclusions out there for people to contemplate that we don't know if they're actually going to happen or not. So right. I personally think that it's just extra information that is so hypothetical and that potentially confuses the issue. That's just my opinion.
I guess, do you think that the trend bar in general is unnecessary?
No, I think the paragraph that says, should this trend continue, it just seems like extra words that don't need to be in there.
Okay.
And it complicates the issue. I think visually seeing the trend bar is fine. That's different than having a whole paragraph in it. But again, that's just my opinion. There's so much information anyway in here.
Yeah.
That I think people can draw their own conclusions from the trend bar, but they don't have to be given a hypothetical paragraph about it. I'd be interested to know if anybody else had the same reaction to it. I mean, it stood right out to me right away.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think somebody could grab onto that paragraph and say, the report shows that the trends are going this way and it should, yeah. Good catch.
Can I ask a clarifying question about that? So this is a paragraph from the comprehensive report. And so I think, we tried to figure out a way to explain that trend bar. That's really what we were trying to do there. But maybe this sounds more like analysis kind of in a way that we're not really doing at the annual report level. Is that part of it, or would you even not expect that to be in the comprehensive report?
I hadn't processed that it was also in the other report. I would defer to staff's judgment about what should happen there.
Maybe there's a more simple way that we can explain the trend bar, or maybe it doesn't need explanation. I mean, like you were saying, visually, you can see what the trend is based on the actual. We have a definition in the glossary of what trend means, and so maybe that's enough. Maybe we don't have to include that level because it makes it bigger than it is.
Right.
Thanks.
And then there was just a couple of things I noted about the multiple unit dwellings. So 94% of them were in structures that contained 5 or more dwellings. 34% of them were identified as potentially student-oriented housing. And 98% of those were in structures with 20 or more dwellings. And then about 66% were not student-oriented multiple unit dwellings. And then lastly, just kind of another way to show the housing mix and the remaining housing need. So you can see that for each category, at this point, we have about 29% of single unit detached dwellings of the need for 2012 through 2032, only 6.5% of middle housing, and then 187.9% of multiple unit. So even though in total, we are sort of above the halfway mark or above pace of where we would think we would be in the monitoring period at this point, that is really predominantly being met by the multiple unit dwellings. And we are under pace in single unit and middle housing.
Elena, can I ask a question that may be in materials previously, but what, when we are looking at the needs analysis general concept, what are we basing the need for a single family dwelling versus a middle housing unit? Is it a mixture of size of households and income levels, or, I'm just kind of curious, because as I think about, let's just say you could be just any one family that's transitioning and going from kids in the house, kids off to college, retiring, and so it's not so much any of those. It's that, yes, your household's smaller, your income will probably be higher. I mean, presumably. So I'm just kind of curious what all factors into that to say, well, this family needs a single family home, and this, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Heather to jump in and talk about sort of the analysis that was done when the adopted forecasts were put together.
Yeah, and first I want to just start out with saying the next time we do the UGB analysis, which we're right on the heels of, it's probably going to look pretty different than the way we did it in 2012, especially with the passage of the middle housing bill and things like that. But just, you know, the first thing you do is you take your population growth and you projected growth and you divide that by an average number of persons per household, typically from the census. And then that gives you the number of housing units that you need. Then to figure out what mix of housing structure type they need to be, you have to look at a whole series of things, much of which we're monitoring right now. So you're looking at things like your development trends, past development trends. You're looking at demographics, just like you were talking about. How are they changing? How are they staying the same? You know, what is your household makeup? Are you seeing more single person household makeup than you have before? Is that growing? Is it projected to grow? Is your demographic aging? All of those things. Or are you seeing more families? Are you seeing an increase in family?
Okay.
All of those things. And then you're also looking at affordability. You're looking at your income levels and comparing that to the housing types in your city. And when you put all of those together, that's supposed to help you, and I'm saying this very simplistically, that's supposed to help you determine whether or not you keep planning for the same mix of housing that you've seen, or if you need to plan for a different housing type. And then, you know, a different mix of housing, which is what we did in Envision Eugene. We planned for more, shifting that mix of new housing to be more multifamily than single unit. There is no, at this point, or at least when we did the housing needs analysis, what we wanted really bad was to have all of that information be in a table format. And then it would just tell you, based on your demographics and income and all of these things, this is how many single units you need, and this is how many, and it just is not that clear of a path. With the new housing, the statewide, the rules that they're working on for the statewide housing needs analysis, which is probably, well, I don't know. I don't know how many of those rules, they haven't even started the rulemaking yet, but eventually when those rules are done, we are going to be doing housing planning in a very different way, and it will be a lot more linear in that respect. And the state and PSU is going to help us do that, but we're not there yet. The rules haven't been written to help us do that, but that's essentially how it works.
Okay. So there's definitely math and formulas and
Math and, you know, but it is all, I mean, yeah, math and formulas and census data and, you know, people that do, you know, do this for a living, looking at housing markets and demographic needs, you
Okay.
know, and trying to put it all together. Yeah.
Thank you. Counselor Ye, I see you.
Yes, I actually was going to ask the same thing. So I think I'm good. Yeah, it's a little, it's a little misleading when you look at this chart and you're like, oh, we're done with multi-housing, you know, good job us, you know, and then every day we talk about how we need more housing. So I could see someone being very confused by looking at this chart and then listening to what we actually say. But I get now a little bit of the history behind that I wasn't around for. So thanks.
Yeah, and if I can respond to that, one of the criticisms of the urban growth boundary analysis process right now is that what you're planning for is new population growth and how many homes are needed for your new population growth. So it's a specific number and bucket of need. The law that they're working on right now, to the bill they're trying to pass to do it from a state level, will look at 3 different buckets. It will look at what is your housing need for your projected growth, what is your housing need for your existing underproduction? And I think that's part of what you're talking about, that we're already at a deficit for housing. So while this is saying, hey, we've met our need for growth, we have an existing underproduction that we can do housing strategies for, but we can't really, we can't take it into account for the math for doing UGB, like UGB expansion planning, for example, not yet. And then the third bucket is going to be how much housing you need for, to house those folks that are experiencing homelessness. And so it's going to be a much bigger number whenever that bill passes and those rules get written.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing if there's no more questions about these housing numbers. So like I said, that was just sort of the part one of housing development, and we'll be back next time with efficiency measures, which will include some of those middle housing numbers that I sent out, as well as BLI impact.
Right. Any questions, guys? I found, Elena, I found that the housing section pretty self-explanatory, and the summaries and the graphs, nothing caught me off guard. But I will say that I support Sue's recommendation in taking out anything that seems theoretical, because I also think it could send up flags that don't need to be sent up. I just think that because there's so many things that could happen. So I'd support the omission of that. Mark.
This is more of a general question. I understand the goals and the driving force in all of this is how planners need to plan. Of course, that's what we're talking about. But it's not clear to me. I mean, no, I should say it this way. It sounds to me like the principal concept in just figuring out what kinds of housing we need in the future relies especially on what the expected demand will be. Like single family housing, there would be demand for that, assuming that a lot of individual families move into town and want a place to live, and so on, with students and workers and various other categories of people. And it's demand driven, as opposed to something like supply limited. So if Eugene built many apartment buildings or condominium buildings that were 2,000 square feet per unit, then those single families that might, if they were moving elsewhere, might live in a single family detached house, they would move into a 4th floor condominium instead, if that's all they could get. Or possibly, and this would come, they would prefer to have that option instead of a single family house detached dwelling. And if in the long run, which I think is the case, we all need to increase urban density, more like what it is in Barcelona and Reykjavik and Paris, then it seems likely that there's going to be a tension between what the supply is versus what the demand is, and some of the demand for single family dwellings is going to have to be shifted to acceptance of, or perhaps even desire for, well, that's a different psychology, for a 4th floor 2,000 square foot condominium or apartment or whatever you call it space. So those kinds of considerations, it seems to me, should be a part of the planning process. And how do you deal with that? And then and particularly in relation to what we're doing, and that is planning for future building of housing.
I'll jump in. So harken back here to when we talk about these ideas of how do we get more density than what we have been seeing, essentially. So those efficiency measures that we're measuring, so things like the how many dwellings we're getting with the multiple unit property tax exemption, is our density higher now that we increase the required minimum density in the R2 zone? Are we seeing more accessory dwellings on average that now that we've started a program for giving system development charges credits for accessory dwellings? And then eventually, are we seeing more middle housing types than we have seen in the past because we changed the code? Those are all strategies that we call efficiency measures because they are ways to use your land supply more efficiently than you would, or compactly is the way I think about it, than you would see if you didn't take those actions. And so, you know, again, the way the process goes, it is part of the UGB planning. You do your buildable lands inventory, you figure out where your land supply is, and that doesn't discount, you know, you're looking at vacant, partially vacant land and developed land. Then you're figuring out what your demand is, which, like I was saying, right now is based on your projected growth and your needs from an affordability standpoint. So the type of housing does play in there more, which is why, at least at this point, we're planning for more apartments than we've seen in the past. And then if your land supply does not, based on past trends, is not going to accommodate that vision, then you need to do those efficiency measures. You need to figure out what actions are going to increase that density, build up, spur redevelopment that you wouldn't otherwise see in an area. And all of those things are efficiency measures. They're all things that come into play. And you have to do them actually before you even consider expanding the urban growth boundary. So it's really, you know, about 4 steps that we have to go through. That's somewhat linear, but that will be part of the conversation. This group will be looking at the technical analysis associated with those efficiency measures. So if council says, let's look at, you know, if the community and council says, let's look at establishing MUPD in a different area. I'm just going to pick the most exciting one. You know, let's broaden that boundary or something. Then we'll have to do technical analysis to demonstrate that applying MUPD in that area or reducing system development charges for that type of development will increase development in there, or for that type of development than we would otherwise see. And that's where this group will come into play. Like, are those real numbers, or are we, you know, making phantom capacity? But yeah, that is absolutely part of the UGB analysis. It's just that, and I know that this is hard, but we're just not there yet. We're monitoring those assumptions we made before. We haven't gotten to that next stage of being able to say, okay, let's redo everything. And we're in a new environment. You know, what is the middle housing code amendments done for us? Can we tell? I mean, it just happened. So we probably aren't going to have a lot of data on that, but you know, things like that. So the discussion's coming, we're just not there yet.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Mark. John?
Thanks. And Heather, you just teed up my question perfectly. So getting into efficiencies when we're looking at that in our next steps, you know, Rick and I were both on Planning Commission when we codified some of these efficiencies, when we codified changing the R2 densities out West Eugene. And when we codified employment lands like on Chad Drive. So when you're looking at bringing back those efficiencies, are you going to bring back both housing and jobs, and how the data is plugging into those to see if those works? Because, you know, I can see where some things have been working, but gosh, I drive Chad Drive every day and I just see acres and acres of land with build to suit in front of it. So I'll be really interested to see how E2 ended up and how the codified parts of our zoning efficiencies work. So I'm really looking forward to that. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll just real quick, Sue, if you don't mind, we can always do more efficiency measures. I just want to put that out there. You know, there's nothing stopping the city from saying, hey, we don't have enough monitoring data to say, for instance, let's say the E1 or the E2 code amendments, let's say we haven't had enough time. But we have a feeling that they're not, qualitatively, we have heard from developers that we didn't do enough in that code to make those lands developable. What more can we do, right? And so those are things that and we can do that from a housing perspective too. We may be able to fit our housing in our land supply, in theory. But we also know we have existing underproduction of housing. We've got a lot of folks experiencing homelessness. So we can go beyond with our strategies. There's the UGB analysis box, and then there's other strategies that the city can continue to take. So I just want to mention that, because sometimes we get really focused on this box, but we can always do more. Check this box, the UGB analysis, meet that criteria, but you can still go above and beyond.
Right, thanks, Heather. Sue?
So I want to respond to Mark's question and comment, because I really have empathy for his position on it. In my experience, developers do what can be financed, and financing comes from banks. Banks are very conservative. They don't tend to look forward and be innovative with concepts. Banks tend to finance things that have been proven successes in the past. So somebody might have a great concept for how to create a housing type that there actually is demand for, because I think what you're talking about, there is demand for it. And there's actually a pool of potential buyers, renters out there who would love that kind of product and could afford it. But the question is, can it be built? And can it be built affordably? So if you take something like the Tate, which is a fantastic project on Olive between 13th and 14th, the only reason that happened, and by the way, it's one of the most amazing housing projects around, because it's like a village in a building. But the only reason that happened is because 5 or 6 of the first people who wanted it to happen were willing to sign $10 million mortgages in order to finance it and make it happen. There's huge risk to do it. So there's demand for what you're talking about, Mark. It's just that the people who finance it are a little bit behind the curve. And Rick, you might have a comment about that. I don't know, you're more experienced in that realm in many ways than I am, but that's my perception about it.
Okay. What else? Any more discussion? You guys tired yet? Okay, well, Heather and Elena, do you all feel like you have what you need from the group tonight? And
Yeah. And I will say, Elena, right, we think that we're probably not going to hold the March the early March meeting, the first Thursday, I think we're just gonna go ahead and plan for the third Thursday in March, right? I think that was where we landed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Let me look at the calendar here, because I'm in DC for
So that's the
11,
16th.
11. Okay. Wait a second. Wait, okay, the 16th. Okay. I have it on my calendar. It's there. I'll be there. I'll be a little jet lagged, but I'll be there. John?
I'm just gonna throw this out there. And I don't know if other people feel the same way, but at some point I would like to have a in-person meeting again. I really enjoy seeing all you people. I know that this is convenient and I don't think we need to do it every time, but I think it would, for me, I get a lot more out of meetings that are in person than I do out of a Zoom meeting. One-on-one, for me, one-on-one or one-on-two Zoom meetings are great, but the free flow of discussion, I mean, Lisa didn't say a word today. I think if she was in the room and we said, hey, does anybody have something to say on this? We may have heard from Lisa. Just a thought, maybe one out of every 4 could be in person or something. I'm throwing it out there because I get quite a lot more out of it.
I'm gonna have to agree with John. Just having gone back into in person with the planning commission, it was night and day. So, but I certainly support the needs of staff and everybody that, it's tough to get everybody in the evening. So, but if you are interested at all at polling the group or anything like that, I would support trying to figure out a time that, or a cadence that would work for everybody. So
Sure. I appreciate that feedback. There are financial considerations as well. We now, when you're doing public meetings, you have to do a hybrid approach to the meeting. You can't just do in person. And so we then have to have a facility where we're able to do both. And that also can require security, and we have to pay for security. So there's some new things that weren't on the table before when we were meeting in person. So maybe something like you're suggesting, John, where it's not every meeting, but it's every so often or something like that, like a quarterly, or I don't know, but we can look into that. So thanks for bringing that up.
okay, well, if there is no further business of the ETAC for the evening, then I am happy to adjourn us, and we will see you all next time.
Nice.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
all.